Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Today's event is brought to you by Columbia Business School's Women's Circle. The Women's Circle cultivates an engaged community for women alumni to support and learn from one another, to strengthen partnerships with other business leaders, and to celebrate our collective impact in keeping Columbia Business School at the forefront of management education. Part of our mission is to facilitate open dialogue around key issues, like today's Theory Applied panel, the socially conscious business, making business good. I'll be your moderator this evening. My name is Christina Alemany. I'm an engineer by training, a marketer by heart, and I currently serve as the CEO of TBGA, a branding and marketing firm. I'm a founding member of the Women's Circle and received my MBA from Columbia Business School. So today we're going to begin with a brief introduction of our panelists and provide a backdrop of our discussion. Then each panelist will share their expertise and experience with us, after which we're going to open up to a live Q&A session where you will have the chance to ask us direct questions. To wrap it all up, our panelists will discuss what they're focusing on and what the future holds. At any point during our conversation, please submit your questions through the Q&A button or use the raise your hand feature during the live Q&A portion. We are so grateful for these three esteemed leaders who have joined us today. Vanessa C. Burbano is an assistant professor of management in the strategy area at Columbia Business School. She was named as one of the best 40 business school professors under 40 by Poets and Quants in 2019. Her research focuses on the strategic implications of socially responsible and irresponsible firm practices. Her award-winning research has been published in peer-reviewed journals and has been featured in Forbes, Fortune, the Financial Times, and New York Times. Christina Volgyesi is Vice President of Marketing at Dr. Bronner'S, the top-selling brand of natural soaps in North America. Dr. Bronner'S is definitely a special company. It's mission-driven, family-owned, and gives away 40% of its profits annually to activist and philanthropic causes while maintaining its industry leadership. Christina's responsibilities include brand strategy, as well as cause marketing and advocacy campaign development. She also helps lead industry-wide campaigns in support of drug policy reform, living wage, fair trade, and industrial hemp farming. And lastly, we have Dan Price, who's the founder and CEO of Gravity Payments. Dan shaped Gravity on the tenets of honesty, transparency, and responsibility, which has made the company a trusted name in credit card processing. Dan believes it's not about doing business as usual anymore, but doing business better. In 2015, he gained recognition after he raised his company's minimum salary to $70,000 while lowering his wage from $1.1 million to the same $70,000. Beyond Gravity, Dan's mission is to help leaders recognize that business should be about purpose, share, service, and making a difference instead of purely focused on profits and shareholder value. Vanessa, Christina, Dan, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. So let me set the stage. We've all seen the books, the articles, the headlines, touting the benefits of purpose-led brands and the importance of social responsibility. Over the years, studies have shown that purpose-led brands stocks outperform their counterparts, they have less turnover, and they experience accelerated growth. And it's not surprising because consumers say they want to help businesses who do good. They'll support companies that share their values, and supporting those companies makes them feel like they're doing their part. However, there's more talk of companies using purpose as doing good theater. More and more, some companies see purpose and corporate responsibility as a PR exercise. Consumers are questioning the positive impact of business, and many cannot name a socially responsible company. Which brings us to today. The latest Edelman Trust Barometer and Morning Consult's most trusted brand surveys found that the majority of consumers do not trust societal leaders to do what's right. In fact, 80% of those surveys claim to have stopped buying from a company that did something to lose their trust, often switching to a competitor. And this new era of distrust has created an opportunity for those companies, especially emerging ones, who authentically step up to the plate. So Vanessa, many companies have created social corporate responsibility programs or CSR programs to capitalize on this opportunity. How can your research help us understand the companies that do and don't benefit from corporate responsibility?
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Christine. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today and share the stage with this really esteemed panel. So I'm going to try and share my screen right now. I'm assuming everybody can see that, no problem. Let me know if that's not the case. So what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about some of my recent research on socially conscious business. And to set the stage for that, I thought I would tell you a little bit about sort of what the kind of history of research on CSR has looked like. So a lot of the early research on CSR was essentially trying to look at whether there's a correlation between companies making socially responsible claims and engaging in socially responsible practices with the bottom line, firm financial performance. And there were sort of 20 years worth of research, I would say, sort of trying to disentangle this, and results were always mixed. We sort of, from the academic side, we kind of couldn't figure out whether this was a positive or a negative relationship here. And there were sort of a number of inherent challenges, I think, with this early research, which has informed some of the research that's happened since then and some of my own research. So one of them is just being able to prove causality. So one issue with, if you look at a relationship between two factors, is that there could be some third factor, which is actually driving both of these things. For example, managerial quality or these other things that are just really hard for us to observe. Or it could be the case that we think we're observing a relationship in one direction, but it's actually going in the other. Maybe the positive relationship we see between CSR and firm financial performance is just because companies who have more money have the ability to invest more in CSR. So sort of how do we tease out whether there's actually a causal relationship here? There's also been sort of this black box problem. You know, what's the mechanism? What's going on here to help us understand the mechanisms through which CSR may or may not benefit firms? And then what are the contingencies? You know, what are the characteristics of companies, of leaders, et cetera, that are going to influence this? So this has really influenced my approach to doing research on this topic. I often implement random assignments. So I do a lot of experiments and field experiments. You can think of this as sort of similar to sort of what's done in medicine in terms of treatments and controlled trials. In companies, you can think of this as sort of A/B testing that allows you to really get at kind of causal relationships. I've also, in terms of trying to get at mechanism, have focused a lot of my research on understanding how CSR influences a key stakeholder of the firm, which is the employee. And then I've also sort of specifically been trying to understand, you know, what are the circumstances under which firms may be more likely to do well by doing good. So I thought I'd just kind of give you a couple of overviews and highlights of some of my recent papers looking at these topics. One was, in one paper, I was interested in understanding, you know, does CSR, so does being socially responsible, influence the wages that workers are willing to accept? For this study, I implemented a field experiment on an online labor marketplace. So I collaborated with a company to hire real workers to do short-term jobs for payment. Randomly assigned whether or not they learned about the social responsibility of the company or not, and then observed the effect on their actual on the actual wages that they were requesting from the employer. And I found that the workers who were randomly assigned to learn about the social responsibility of the company were willing to accept lower wages than those who were not. And what's interesting is we did some sort of testing of mechanism here, and what seemed to be happening is that these workers were viewing the company's social responsibility as a signal that they would themselves be more likely to be treated fairly when they became an employee of the company. And interestingly, this was driven by the higher performing workers who felt that they had the most to lose if they were going to be treated unfairly because of opportunity costs. So in a different paper, I've been interested in understanding, the effect of corporate volunteering initiatives. A lot of companies have programs like this. Well, do these influence employees in any sort of long-lasting way or not? So to study this, this is currently a working paper that we are finalizing right now. For a couple of years, we collaborated with a Latin American bank to conduct a field experiment in which we randomly assigned incoming employees to either participate in a volunteering initiative as part of their onboarding process or not. And then we tracked these employees on a number of metrics for the next year. And really interestingly, we found that this one intervention, it was literally one day of them participating in a corporate volunteering program as part of their employee onboarding process. And that was the only thing that was varied, nothing else was varied. Decrease their levels of stress in the workplace and turnover, so their likelihood of leaving the firm 10 months later. And so there's sort of this really interesting, I think, new work in psychology and organizational behavior that looks at sort of wise interventions, how sometimes doing small interventions in companies that change the way that employees think or experience something in the company can really have long-lasting effects. And this is an example, I think, of that. So another thing that I was interested in understanding, in terms of contingencies for how employees or job seekers in this particular paper might respond to social responsibility is, well, how does the context matter? How does the context of the organization matter? And specifically, how does the context of sort of the leadership gender and assumptions that might be made based on that influence how individuals respond to CSR? And so for this study, we again conducted a field experiment on an online labor marketplace. We sort of identified a set of individuals or a pool of individuals who might be interested in a particular job opportunity. And then we randomly assigned whether they were informed about sort of the social and environmental claims of the organization, diversity, equity, and inclusion claims of the organization, or a control group. As well as we also simultaneously varied the founder gender, the leadership gender of the organization. And then observed how this affected their likelihood of being interested in the job opportunity that was offered for them. And then at the end, we did actually hire one person per condition for a short-term job separately from the purpose of the experiment. But what we mainly wanted to see was how these things were going to influence their interest in the job. And so this graph, I think, shows sort of the main effect, the main results of this paper. And what you can see here is that so the light gray bar indicates sort of the control condition of not being informed about community or diversity related CSR, just sort of a for-profit framing. The light gray indicates that they were told about the environmental and community-oriented CSR of the firm. The dark bar shows diversity, so diversity, equity, inclusion-related CSR of the firm. And then we varied, as you can see, whether the founders were all male, mixed gender, or female. And I think the really interesting thing is that if you look particularly here, essentially we found that when the founders that were communicating this message were male, CSR claims actually led to lower job applicant interest, but when they were female, CSR claims led to higher job applicant interest. And interestingly, I don't have time to go into all of the details, but this was also quite similar amongst both male and female prospective employees. And the reason we think that this might be happening is, there's a lot of research in sort of psychology and sociology that suggests that social claims may be gender typed. So profit-oriented claims tend to be associated a little bit more with agentic, sort of male-oriented assumptions, whereas social claims are associated with more female-typed assumptions and expectations. And so sometimes when you have sort of the congruence or incongruence of these two things, you see effects like this, which we thought were really interesting. So then, beyond just looking at consistency, so I think interestingly, there's sort of a lot of nuances around the consistency of social claims and practices within the context of other non-sustainability related claims or characteristics of the organization. And then I'm also really interested in understanding, how does consistency within different levels, different types of sustainability, you could say, affect how these things are perceived. And in particular, in this working paper, we're looking at the context of new ventures in Kickstarter campaigns. And we specifically looked at whether, if you consider that new ventures can engage in product level sustainability or not, so their products can have sustainable characteristics or not, and they can also, above and beyond that, do things sort of at the organizational level or not. So for example, things like charitable giving would be an example of org level sustainability that a new venture could sort of choose to engage in or not. So we look at sort of 300,000 Kickstarter campaigns. We use machine learning to sort of code them along these axes, and then we look at how these things are correlated with their likelihood of success. And interestingly, we find that the new ventures that were sort of sustainable at the organization only or the product only, but not both, were statistically equivalent to those that didn't engage in any type of sustainability at all. Whereas those that did engage in both, so the dual sustainability new ventures, which are those that were perceived as being sustainable both at the product level as well as the organizational level, increased their probability of success by 4% compared to those that didn't. And then we wanted to understand the mechanism. So we do some things with this observational data, and then we ran a follow-up experiment to try to tease out mechanism. And what we find is that it seems to be that perceptions of authenticity really explain this effect. So we find that individuals viewed an organization that was dual as opposed to just one of the types of sustainability as more authentic. And if you were sort of touting a sustainable product but weren't perceived at being committed to sustainability at the org level or vice versa, that this was viewed as less authentic, and that helped to explain the differences in success that we found in this paper. So my most recent research is looking at the topic of CEO activism. I think CEO activism is sort of a really interesting kind of new phenomenon that we didn't see more than maybe 10 years ago. I think one of the earliest examples of what I'll call CEO activism or companies taking stances on social political issues was, you may remember back in 2011 when the Chick-fil-A CEO stepped into the gay marriage debate against gay marriage. Then we had Starbucks coming in and publicly making statements in favor of gay marriage. We've since seen this on issues like climate change in the past few years, and then very recently, for example, on issues related to the Georgia voting law. And I think this is fascinating from a strategy perspective because it's a really new phenomenon and we don't know very much about what the strategic implications are for companies that are doing this. So I have a paper that was just published this year that basically looks at this. I wanted to understand how, excuse me, how companies communicating a stance on a social political issue influences worker motivation. I conducted a field experiment again to do this. So I hired real workers to complete real jobs for real short-term jobs for payment. I collaborated with a startup organization to conduct this experiment. And then we randomly assigned whether or not the workers learned about a political stance of the company. At the time we ran this, the issue of gender-neutral bathrooms was very sort of hot and in the news, so we used that issue. And then looked at how this affected their willingness to do extra work for the company, as well as the quality of their work. We found that it didn't influence the quality of the required work that they did, but it did have a really interesting effect on the amount of sort of extra work they were willing to do, sort of their willingness to go above and beyond for their company, essentially. So here you can see on this slide, so amongst workers who agreed with the issue, who agreed with the issue of gender-neutral bathrooms being important, you can see that if the company also agreed with the issue, which is in green, Compared to the control group, which saw nothing about the political stance, you can see that they're statistically equivalent. Whereas if a company disagreed with the issue, so was opposing what the employee thought, we see a statistically significant sort of reduction in motivation and willingness to go above and beyond for the company. And then we see almost the parallel thing for the other side. So if amongst workers who disagreed with the issue, thought that that gender neutral bathrooms like don't belong in the workplace, if the company took a stance that was the same as that of the workers, which was would be the red here, you can see that it looks a bit higher, but it is statistically equivalent to the control group. Whereas if the company had an opposing stance from that of the employee, we see a significant reduction in motivation here. And we have digged into this a little bit to try to understand why that might be the case. And we think it's driven by the fact that people tend to make assumptions that others share their social political beliefs. And we also see that individuals react more strongly to negative information that is surprising than to positive information that is unsurprising. And so this is sort of, if you find out that your employer sort of has values that are misaligned with yours, that is negative and surprising, and more likely to have a negative effect than if you're just sort of confirming that your employer shares your values on these types of issues. So this, I think, is a really there's going to be a lot more research, I think, on this topic going forward because it's such a new phenomenon. But so far my research suggests that there's a bit of a risk. Companies have to be really careful about either knowing the values on these social political issues of their employees before taking these types of stances. Otherwise, this suggests that there's quite a risk there. So that's all that I have for you all on the research front. Thanks very much for your attention. So this was some of the theory on how CSR might influence employees and therefore the bottom line. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Christina, who could perhaps tell folks a little bit about how this kind of plays out in practice, in the real world based on your experience.
Thank you so much. Let me get my screen shared. All right. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. Let me know if not.
We can't see your screen, Christina.
You cannot?
Correct.
Okay, let's try that again. That should work now. How about now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much, Vanessa and Christine, for inviting me today. Vanessa, your talk was fantastic. So really interesting research. And I'm really pleased to be here this evening to share with you a little bit about Dr. Bronner's and how we've engaged our employees and consumers around CSR. But first, a little background for those of you who may not be familiar with our company. We're the top selling natural brand of soap in North America. And you can see our line of iconic soap labels and bottles up here on the screen, but we make other personal care products as well. We make hand sanitizer, lotion, toothpaste, shaving soaps. We also sell a coconut oil, and we're sold worldwide in 50 countries. We're family owned and operated by the Bronner family, who are 5th generation soap makers. Our founder, Emanuel Bronner, David and Michael Bronner's grandfather, the 2 brothers who run the company today, founded Dr. Bronner's in 1948 after fleeing Germany for the US before the war. Sadly, when his parents perished in the Holocaust, he decided at that point to dedicate his life to his all-one vision, which was to unite humankind across all religious and ethnic divides. Essentially, this was his peace plan, or moral ABCs, and what's written currently on our bottles today. He also believed that a company has a responsibility to share the profits with the workers and the earth from which you made it. And his son, Ralph, called this approach constructive capitalism. And it's what we practice today in all aspects of our business, from the products we make, through our supply chains, to our dedicated activism and charitable giving, to our relationships with employees, consumers, suppliers. And it's important to us that our products have a real positive positive impact on the people and communities worldwide that make them. So CSR is very much in our DNA. And how this manifests day to day is through our 6 cosmic principles that are posted billboard sized inside our factory in Vista, California. It's our version of stakeholder capitalism. So number 1 priority for ourselves, we need to work hard and grow. To be able to, we need to be profitable before we can do good. We have revenues of $190 million last year, and we're able to donate 40% of profits to activists and charitable causes. So that's about 8.5% of net revenue. We also have to do right by our customers. So that means producing the best quality products. We're certified fair trade and organic and committed to regenerative organic agriculture and sourcing all major ingredients regenerative. Number 3 is about treating employees like family. So this is all about our benefits package, fully paid healthcare, 10% profit sharing, free vegan lunches, et cetera, et cetera. Number 4, be fair to suppliers. So we, while we make our products in the US, we source our raw ingredients globally. So it's all about fair prices, fair trade, paying a 10% premium on those ingredients that go back into a community fund that's allocated to projects that the farmers direct themselves. Number 5, this is treat the earth like home. So this is about our sustainability goals. So our commitment to zero waste by 2030, the fact we're 100% renewably powered, we're a benefit corporation certified B Corp. And then number 6, fund and fight for what's right. So we have 11 issue areas we support, and I'll share those with you. We're very transparent with our employees. Despite being privately owned, we share this financial sort of stewardship slide here that you see, and we publicly share this as well in our CSR report. We cap our salaries 5 to 1 against the lowest paid fully vested employee, and that allows us to donate what we do annually. So you can see that, donations and sponsorships here. And those donations and sponsorships go to a range of different issue areas, from animal advocacy to drug and psychedelic policy reform to regenerative organic agriculture and wage equality. So we really try to market our causes, so to speak, and do so as Emmanuel Bronner did through the soap label, as well as elevating these issues through all our channels and in partnership always with our nonprofit ally partners. And we invite our staff to join in, not just those who are in the marketing department with me or PR or event teams, but we do our best to engage our employees. I want to share a couple of campaigns just briefly. Last fall, we ran a very successful Heal Soul campaign to educate consumers on psychedelic assisted therapies as an alternative treatment for PTSD and depression. We printed the special Heal Soul label that had a lot of education on it, and we printed and distributed 3 million bottles that were sold through the natural products industry, natural product grocers, Target, Walmart. We also ran this campaign in partnership with various nonprofit organizations that are doing the work, and supported 3 ballot initiatives to legalize psilocybin therapy, decriminalize various drugs in Oregon and DC, and we won those. Working very closely with Michael Pollan. Some of you may have read his bestseller, How to Change Your Mind. And we actually even had a tweet to legalize psilocybin therapy that generated almost 5 million views. So again, really able to use our marketing channels and our relationships with these nonprofits that we support to really do some education. On the right-hand side here was, and I would say that the Heal Soul campaign was very successful, even with our retail partners. Our Fair Pay Today campaign was more controversial. We ran this in 2016. We worked with 48 natural products industry brands, and they also either stickered their products or changed the labels like we did on our liquid soaps to educate consumers that raising the minimum wage is good for business owners. We also partnered with 50 retail stores across the country to actually hold these conversations in the grocery stores. So to do special displays We got behind 4 ballot initiatives that all won in Arizona, Colorado, Maine, and Washington, working again with Business for a Fair Minimum Wage and the Fairness Project, our two allies. So outside of these more cause marketing campaigns, internally, we have an employee-directed charitable giving program, which allows our employees to nominate various organizations that they may support through volunteer efforts. And we have just a lot of fun with that internal program. We also have a green team that runs Earth Week events and sustainability events. So just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of kind of what we do inside and outside of the company, but always our belief is that activism, that we need to be rooted in activism to be viewed as authentic, especially in an age of cause washing, where a lot of companies are using causes to sell their products. As a soap company, we definitely don't stay in our lane. We definitely exist to be more than just a business, but we also know our place and follow the leadership of those either frontline activists or nonprofit organizations that are doing the work day to day. So this is just a snapshot of last year's our last year's CSR report. So just one page from the report. We call our CSR report our all-one report. And we print our activist calendar. We list all the organizations we support. It's really a mix of personal stories and impact so that we can hold ourselves accountable and be transparent with our work, but also for our employees to know that they matter in the work we do. They have a role to play. So you can see some photos. This is our green team here on the left and some of our production team. So the big question is, do employees care? We did a little survey, not as sophisticated research as what Vanessa does day to day, but on Monday we sent out a company survey and we were able to include a couple of questions. One, in your decision to apply and work at Dr. Bronner's, how important are the following considerations? So location, commute, ethical sourcing of ingredients, love of the product, our commitment to philanthropy, salary benefits, opportunities for professional growth, and our cosmic principles or corporate social responsibility. And the top 4 responses were benefits first, cosmic principles, opportunities for growth, and philanthropic giving. And the philanthropic giving moved to the 3rd spot when we looked at when we asked the question, how important are all these considerations in making your decision to stay with Dr. Bronner's. And we have very low turnover at Dr. Bronner's, about 4%. We even have some employees that have been with us for 30 plus years. I think 37 years is the longest employee that's been with us the longest and had actually been hired by Emmanuel Bronner himself. Okay, I have just a few more slides here. So I was interested to look at some of the screening interviews of newly hired employees. So here's a few quotes from the last 4 employees that we hired, and I'll just read one of them. This is from Ivan, our R&D technician. Looking at the label, something is different about the company. You give back to community. Criminal justice reform, animal advocacy, you have a lot of morals. Also reducing emissions. Nice to see the company works hard at this. We also have been really trying to, how to build culture, as many businesses have been struggling with through COVID. And we had a survey last year that went out where we had 87% engagement. And we were just curious what the 3 top words were to describe the culture at Dr. Bronner's. So just sharing this little word cloud here, our employees responded with words like inclusive, family, hardworking, progressive, all one, inspiring, environmental, love, unity. So that was great to see. And then my last slide, here are some testimonials from employees. This was a confidential survey that the Union Tribune carried out with our staff. And we were honored with an award, San Diego's Best Mid-Sized Company to Work For Award. And I'll just end with sharing one quote, which I think sums up things really nicely. Dr. Bronner's is an example of a corporation where the more you give and take care of others allows you still to profit and feel great in your soul. So I thought that was just a beautiful summary. So that's all I have for you. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A, and at this time would love to hand it over to Dan, who's a founder and owner, to hear his story. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Christina. That was great. Really appreciate it. I I don't know how many of you have seen the movie The Big Lebowski, but I dressed as the dude since I was on a panel with all smart women, smarter than me. Thank you for having me, and thanks for inviting me. I'm the dude today. Yeah, I thought it was fascinating research that Vanessa shared, and really cool kind of case study in Dr. Bronner's. So I'm here to share our case study, gravity payments. So if you've heard of me or gravity payments, it's probably because you heard about how in 2015 I took $1 million pay cut so that we could have a $70,000 minimum wage across our company. This was at a time that our industry was doing a rapid amount of consolidation between large companies and using that consolidation to lay off employees and drive ultimately the wages down of the existing employees. So at the time, we were able to get away with something that really is wrong, that we should not have been able to get away with, which is we were paying a minimum of $35,000 a year. So a $70,000 minimum wage was able to had the effect of doubling the pay for a third of our employees. We also had a middle chunk of the employees that got some sort of raise, and then we had a third of our employees that were already highly compensated, so they didn't get any sort of specific raise tied to this. Right away when it came out, my parents, who are huge Rush Limbaugh fans, and my grandmother called me and said, Rush Limbaugh's about to talk about what you did on his show. And Fox News was talking about it. And so they were really excited because they thought, wow, our son is going to be on our favorite show, our talked about subject of our favorite show. And so they listened to it, and Rush Limbaugh shared about how the company was going to fail. In fact, he said, this is going to be another case study about how socialism always fails. And this will be a case study in MBA programs about how whenever you try to do something like take care of workers, it actually causes more harm than good. Us kind of crazy liberals have these ideas, but then they actually make things worse for the people that we're trying to help. Fox News piled on, and they literally said that my employees would be on the breadlines over this, and that it was a very self-serving move because it was going to buy me a lot of love from my employees, but ultimately would be their own demise. So that was kind of the setup, and then the New York Times followed on and wrote about all the controversy surrounding it, mostly related to that narrative. And so how did it turn out 6 years later? Well, we tripled as a company. Our net revenue went from about $15 million a year to about $45 million a year. Our payment processing volume for small businesses went from about $3 billion a year to closer to $11-12 billion a year now. So almost like a 3-4x multiple in terms of the payment processing volume. The rates we charge to our small businesses went down, not up. And the service level we provide and the number of products and features grew exponentially. And that's really important to us because the whole mission of the company is to stick up for the underdog out there, the little guy, or, we probably need better language than that, but, that idea. And so, so it was really important to us that this decision worked out for all those small businesses because they were the ones that we helped. And just to be clear about what we do, basically when you use your credit card, it's really simple and easy for you, but it's very expensive and a pain in the butt for the small businesses that take that. So we tried to eliminate the costs and headaches associated with accepting cards or reduce them. So also some other things that maybe kind of explain some of our success, our employee turnover was cut in half. And the quality of life went way up for all of us. So prior to our $70,000 living wage announcement and the compression of our pay scale from $35,000 to $1 million down to $70,000 to about $250,000 initially, since it's expanded to about $300,000. We had between 0 and 2 babies born per year before that change, and we've had 60 babies born amongst the company in the last 6 years, so about a 10x increase. We also had a 10x rise in first-time home ownership amongst our team, and people, 70% of the company announced or told us that they were able to pay down debts. A lot of that was student debt, as probably no one on here would be really that surprised about. And we had between a doubling and a tripling of the savings rate for our 401k. But what else happened? Well, systemically things went from bad to much worse. And income inequality is worse than it's ever been. In the pandemic, we've been minting more more billionaires and more decabillionaires during the pandemic than we have pretty much throughout human history combined until then. So that's a really sad state of affairs. This when we have record long lines at food banks. One of my employees told me the other day there was a line of cars outside of his house, which is close to Disneyland in Orlando. And the line of cars was 7 miles long to get to a food bank. So really crushing circumstances when we talk about inequality. So I think we proved two things. I think we proved this sort of thing works. And I think we also proved that under our current system, we're going to be an exception, not the rule, and we will be the exception. The fact that we're still talking about this 6 years later proves how bad it is. And so I think we are trying to tell the world, don't focus on us as anybody that deserves any credit. Don't make me a hero. This should be normal. And we need to have systemic reforms, systemic legislative reforms. We need the executive branch to enforce laws against monopolies, against corruption. We need to do all these things because right now we're basically setting up a system where, if billionaires control a third of the wealth in the United States and growing exponentially the way they do right now, eventually they'll come knocking at Dr. Bronner's and at Gravity Payments, and they'll offer more and more money to take the company away from what it historically has been and turn it into the exact opposite side of the size of, or type of company. And while we'll say no and they'll say no, eventually there will be very few of us left standing, and they will use their superior stock price driven by manipulation of stock buybacks and things like that to basically squeeze all the rest of us out of the market. So yeah, that's the situation we're in, I think, right now in 2021. And what I don't like about it is I think I definitively know that I'm not the answer. I'm not the solution. So that's what's tough. But what I really do like about it, what makes me feel good, is the only real solution here is all of us working together. So I think we need to get over some of our division that has us where we are today, work together and solve this problem. It's not necessarily a Republican versus Democrat thing. I'm from Idaho, where it's one of the most Republican states in the United States, and people generally agree with everything that I've shared here. So they need the right packaging, the right message, all those sorts of things, but people there absolutely can get on board for this sort of message. So we're out there fighting for that, and it was just such a pleasure to be here with you all, and appreciate you having me.
Awesome, Dan. Thanks so much. So we're going to open it up to Q&A. And I also asked people on social media to send in their questions. So while we're answering questions, if you guys have more questions, just keep on sending it to us through the Q&A or raise your hand. The first question I have for you, Vanessa, and it was about, I wouldn't call it a trend, but the new apolitical stances that we're seeing with Coinbase and most lately Basecamp, where they're actually changing their CSR focus to apolitical.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting in the broader, so sort of just couch that, I think, in different layers. So within the broader subset of sort of CEO activism, communicating stances on social political issues, we've also seen in very recent times communication on purely political issues, which is a little bit different from communication on social political issues. So we had companies endorsing different presidential candidates and things like that. And that's also so just kind of conceptually a little bit different from some of the things that we've seen in the past. And then amongst that, we also have essentially these sort of apolitical stances coming into the forefront as well, which is different from sort of passively not taking a stance. It's almost actively taking a stance that you will not be political and won't get involved in these sort of political issues. And so I think it's fascinating. I have so I've done a recent study that tries to look at that, and kind of what we seem to be seeing is that it really varies by age of your stakeholder and individual. So interestingly, the older generations seem to respond really positively to apolitical stances. They seem to sort of, on average, like the idea that companies, should be separate from and shouldn't be involving themselves in business. Whereas for like the Gen Z stakeholders, for example, we see the opposite. They don't like the apolitical stance. They react kind of negatively to that. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. It'll also be interesting to see how this plays out sort of as the demographics of who companies, workforces, and stakeholders change over time. I think that'll also sort of influence how these things are received by stakeholders that are important to the companies. But yeah, I think it's fascinating, and there's very little research really on this because it's so, it's such a new phenomenon. But I expect that in the next year or two, we're going to see a lot more.
Great. We have our next question that is around advertising. And I'll open that up to Dan and Christina. Do you promote your CSR stances in digital ad campaigns? And do those have, if you do they have a higher conversion rate versus product-only digital campaigns?
I can answer that first. Well, first of all, Dr. Bronner's, we don't have an advertising budget. So most of what we do is kind of trying to create news and earn media, but obviously we're on all social media channels. And we have a very modest advertising budget, and actually re-looking at our whole e-commerce sort of platform. But in terms of engagement, I can say that yes, depending on the issue, we get great engagement on our cause-based marketing. But remember too that we are in the business of selling soap so that we can give away all these profits to charitable causes. So it's sort of the vehicle. And so when people say, hey, just want you to stick to soap making, I don't like your politics, we always reply, well, our politics are our ingredients. And so it's sort of hard for us to differentiate between, our communication strategy, which is activism rooted in product and then rooted in these causes and lifting up these stories and doing that movement building. So yes, I guess if I look at even our newsletter strategies, we get the most clicks on, when we offer a product on sale, if somebody's looking to shop. But, we get 5 million views on a tweet that's legalize psilocybin therapy. So it's not totally clear cut. I would say, it's kind of on par. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Gravity and Dr. Bronner's are 100% aligned on this. I could plus one to everything Christina said, so I won't say it all again, but maybe just to add something just for fun for everybody. I thought it was really interesting, and I pointed this out, how Uber Eats spent $13 million for a half-minute Super Bowl ad saying to support local restaurants. And the policies of Uber Eats at that time taking up to 40% of the revenue on a transaction, which is more than the restaurant, can afford to pay them, and was really, like a Trojan horse like method of destroying our local restaurants. So they spent that $13 million plus whatever it cost to pay Dana Carvey and Cardi B and that guy from Queer Eye that looks like me, Jonathan Van Ness, to go and promote that. Yeah, I think they would have been much better off charging those small restaurants less money and not going with that Super Bowl ad.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And yeah, it's the same thing. If we don't advertise because we rather give those dollars to those nonprofit organizations that are doing the work instead of, doing that sort of cause washing, so to speak, as Dan just described with Uber Eats. So great example.
We have another question for Dan and Christina. How have other companies asked you about your internal management policies and processes? And how do you think about affecting other businesses if you do?
Okay, so I'll give a quick answer. Yeah, what you said in the intro is true. Like my life goal has been for as long as I've been an adult to make business about doing good, solving the problems of humanity and not greed and destroying the planet and putting people into bad situations when it comes to their living situation. And so I didn't do the $70,000 minimum wage to address that on a macro basis. I really did it for us and it's worked for us. But when the story became this like viral meme that everybody could kind of instantly gravitate toward it, I started to think, well, I can go out there and promote this. And so I spent a lot of my time promoting it. And what I found was I don't think that, I think no matter how many people are out there promoting what I'm doing, I don't think it would have the right effect on a macro basis, because what we have here in the United States is for the first time in 100 years, the life expectancy is going down every year instead of up. And we have a level of inequality that's like a 100-year high. We basically have all these things, these social indicators that tend to be precursors to things like the Great Depression or the rise of fascism. Like we have all these social indicators on the rise right now. Not to mention the impending threat around environmental catastrophe, either because of climate change or nuclear war. So those are the real issues. And I just think that if I'm being totally honest, I don't think there's anything that I've done in my business as a private business owner that is going to have any meaningful effect on any of those things. And so that's where I started to realize that if that's really the goal, we need systemic change. We can't have this win-win ideology of thinking everybody can have their cake and eat it too. And, you know, it's okay for Al Gore to be like the leading climate change promoter, flying around in his private jet promoting that we should have, you know, less emissions. Like that's not okay anymore. And we really need to have, you know, things that are very reasonable that we've had in the past to address issues like high taxes on the rich, you know, real systemic reforms like a minimum wage that's probably should be $25 to $30 an hour. If productivity and incomes had been in lockstep for the last 40 years, the median income in the United States would be $100,000 right now. Think about how that would impact people's attitudes toward immigrants, toward people that look different or have like a different set of beliefs than they do. So these are all the things where I realized that if I was thinking that anything I've done has any chance of impacting any of the big issues, that would be misguided. And that's where it really has to be on all of us. So I guess that would be my answer.
I would say, you know, at Dr. Bronner's, where we try to have influence is within the natural products industry. So, you know, we're a fair trade company. What does that mean in terms of, you know, certifying all our raw ingredients, also our product, paying a living wage. So very much aligned with, you know, the story that Dan has shared. And so, you know, we do have influence over other businesses. We're often even, you know, considered a watchdog around, you know, greenwashing, cause washing, and being transparent as a business is something that we think is super critical. So we do our best to be transparent and to model best practices and hope that that inspires. A lot of the movement building and campaigns that we've worked on, you know, we're doing it to lift up other businesses as much as Dr. Bronner's. And sometimes we forget about Dr. Bronner's and we're just working on the campaign together, whether it was like one example was our 10-year effort. Well, it was actually 20-year effort to legalize industrial hemp farming in the US. It's how I got to know the Bronner family. And we ran, and I started actually at the company as a consultant to create a public education campaign to legalize hemp farming. And that became a 10-year campaign called Hemp History Week, which finished its 10th year when we actually legalized hemp farming. But part of that was working with competitors to all get behind, you know, a campaign that included retail placements, events in all 50 states, PR efforts, celebrity influencer endorsements, and things like that. So again, it was not about Dr. Bronner's, hey, we use a little bit of hemp oil in our soaps, let's, try to increase our sales by this campaign. It was like, no, we have an issue that's totally unfair. There's an economic opportunity for American farmers. They should be able to grow hemp. We shouldn't be having to import it from Canada. And let's work with all competitors, everybody that is, has hemp as an ingredient, and, support hemp farmers and working together, as well as going to to Washington, DC to lobby and such. So it's just like this amazing example of like us walking the talk, but then also partnering with other businesses to do that. And we've done that along the same lines with our Fair Pay Today campaign. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we're getting close to the end of the hour, and I wanted to get this last question answered. And I think, Vanessa, you would be the perfect person to answer it. What are your opinions, if you have any, about all of the corporate statements made in the wake of George Floyd, protests, BLM, and the progress made by companies around diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So, I think there's sort of the claims that companies make and tweets that are easy to put out, and then there's sort of the actual practices and processes and outcomes that are aligned with that. And one thing that I think is interesting is in sort of the CSR social space, either the greenwashing, cause washing, as kind of Christina and Dan alluded to. In some ways, that's easier to pull off from a stakeholder perspective, because it's kind of hard to really know what the ESG levels of a given company are and how that compares to their competitors. And nonprofits play a role in sort of getting that information out, et cetera. But on this particular issue of Black Lives Matter and diversity progress, I think a difference there is that the outcomes are quite apparent to stakeholders. It's pretty easy to sort of see if after a year after these claims were made, look at the board of directors, look at the leadership of the firm, look how do employees feel about these things? Do we see these things sort of impacting change or not? I think stakeholders tend to give companies sort of a grace period. So, a lot of companies have not done well on this issue, have made statements now, and I think people are sort of waiting to see if change will happen. But if it doesn't, because these outcomes are quite easily observable and therefore salient, I do think the companies that are inconsistent in sort of their claims and actions are eventually going to be penalized, particularly in this realm.
I have to jump in here real quick, Christine, if it's okay. Otherwise I wouldn't sleep well tonight. I just found it very intriguing how Amazon was driving this message of Black Lives Matter so hard, and then at the same time breaking up a union that was trying to create wages that would be in alignment with Black Lives Matter. And I think that says everything about the division that we have in the country. I know there's plenty of blame to go around, but I think we probably blame politicians appropriately so, but really don't blame companies, because when you have somebody who's such an outspoken Democrat like Jeff Bezos having such power and such clear hypocrisy, that is going to drive a huge number of people to say, whatever that guy believes, I just want to believe the opposite. And so if Jeff Bezos, has that level of power and hypocrisy and then says, go get a vaccine, people are going to hear, don't go get a vaccine. This guy is clearly not trustworthy. And so I think that there's really only one answer. That's to take away the guy's power, and we can all do it, but we have to stop fighting and work together and do it. And so I think, actions speak louder than words, I guess, is how I would think of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. And I wanted to give you guys one last thing. I know, there's a book on the way. So I wanted you guys to tell us, what you're working on now, and, what you think the future may hold. And I'll go in the same order that we went in before and begin with Vanessa.
So my recent and new research, I think, is really all going to be on this topic of CEO activism, companies taking stances on these issues like the protests, and I mean, I just think this is such a really interesting phenomenon that hasn't been studied. So stay tuned, check out my website in the next year or so, and you'll see more research on that.
Awesome. Christina?
Well, we just had our first book written about Dr. Bronner's, so I'm going to give a book plug. Our VP of Special Ops has written Honor Thy Label, Dr. Bronner's Unconventional Journey to a Clean, Green, and Ethical Supply Chain. But there's lots of amazing information in here for entrepreneurs and business owners. So I recommend it wherever you buy books, or drbronner.com. And we're working on a really exciting new product launch. So I would encourage everybody to follow us on social media. And this summer, there'll be some exciting news. Again, just a product that is rooted in, some of the cause work we're doing. So just giving a little plug, keep you guys interested. But thanks so much for today. It's been great.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I've been told I have an unusual journey. I think all of us are totally special and unique, so I completely reject that. But, along those lines, like, I did grow up in a conservative Christian family, fourth of 6 kids, grew up in the country down the street from a dump. And I started my business when I was 17, and I've been doing it my whole life. So I feel like there's some experiences that I've had that other people just haven't had the opportunities that I've had, and I take that very seriously. That, I guess you could call it privilege, And so I'm trying to work really hard to translate the rooms that I've been in that some people weren't able to be in, and basically share what's going on and expose what's happening with corporate America and with billionaires, and just kind of how we think about money and capitalism in 2021. So I post very mild criticisms of capitalism on social media. I've noticed on Twitter, people tell me not enough, comrade, keep going. On Instagram, I get a lot of kissy faces and hearts and roses. And then on LinkedIn, people tell me to go to hell and call me all sorts of awful names. So I just keep, I don't worry about any of that too much. I just keep sharing that stuff out there. So, and then just the other day, like, I was on Fox News debating, how to take care of small businesses, and pointing out that small businesses are very hampered both in formation and operation by the cost of having to provide healthcare for employees, when our healthcare system is a giveaway to insurance companies, insurance executives, billionaires, people at the top, shareholders. And small businesses would be able to pay more and would just have a much better chance if we had guaranteed healthcare for everybody that was free and provided, for everybody. So, not too many people have the background that I have where they have the opportunity to say that on Fox News. So I feel like anybody that does have the opportunity needs to do it. So that's pretty much outside of work how I've been spending my time lately.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. It was really, thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and giving us a real glimpse into the research and what it's like to be a CSR company. Through and through. I'm going to wrap this up. Our next panel is going to be on IoT and privacy. So keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, we're going to try to answer as many questions as possible offline. And what's your dog's name, Dan?
Samantha.
Samantha. Awesome. Well, good night, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.